You're listening to the Happy Doc Student Podcast, a podcast dedicated to providing clarity to the often mysterious doctoral process. Do you feel like you're losing your mind? Let me and my guests show you how to put more joy in your journey and graduate with your sanity, health, and relationships intact. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Frederick, and today I welcome back two very special guests, Dr. Jodie Hemerda and Dr. Deborah Carpenter. Each has been a guest individually, but they're here today to share their collective story. Now, many Happy Doc student episodes touch on the critically important student-chair relationship, but today we are hitting it head-on because Jodie served as Deborah's chair. Ladies, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having us, Heather. We're so excited to be here.
Deborah, why don't we start with you setting the stage, reflecting back to what it was like being a student and where you were in your program, how it came to be that you met and started working with Jodie.
Well, other than the fact that I was the luckiest doctoral student in the universe, it all kind of started with not really knowing anything about my chair, just getting to the point in my program where it was time to select a chair or to ask if a chair would work with me. So I really kind of reflect back, and this is a great opportunity to take a look in the rearview mirror and reflect back at all of the stages of the journey, because you certainly feel like you have lessons learned, and maybe you didn't even know what the lesson was as you were learning it. But one of the things as I looked back to working with a chair is I didn't know anything about Jodie other than she had a strong reputation as being a really good chair, and that she shared the discipline that I was planning to study, the topic I was planning to examine. So my whole approach going into that experience was, how could I show Jodie that I was a student that was really ready for this phase in the program? I wanted to show her that I had the dispositions, the initiative, the overall readiness, the excitement, that I really wanted this to go well. And so I guess what I wanted to think about is not so much, will I like Jodie or will I be able to get along with Jodie? It was, what can I do to ensure that she would like to take me on? Because I imagine that, chairs are busy and that they have lots of requests. So I made sure that I showed my readiness in terms of a completed, or what I thought was a complete letter of intent, that I was excited about the prospect of getting started, and that I was willing to work hard and to do the things that were asked of me so that I could do my part in making this a positive relationship.
The relationship, I sometimes compare it to a short-term marriage. It's an intense relationship, and it's something that you don't embark on, or at least I don't think should be embarked on without a little bit of thought. Is this the right person to mentor me? Am I the right person to mentor this student? So I'm curious, Jodie, when you got that email from Deborah asking if you would be willing to be her chair, how did you perceive it?
Yeah, that's a great way forward. I always like to review students' LOIs. I like to know what program they're in, what specialization they're in. And so if I have a student who presents all of that information in the first communication, that already tells me that they're organized and that they're presenting themselves in a professional way. And so, as Debbie's saying, she's seeing this from the perspective of a student thinking that chairs are very busy. And as the chair, I am thinking I'm going to invest in this student, and I want to make sure that even before I meet them, I want to make sure that they're presenting themselves in a way that tells me that this student is ready to get to work, because it is an intense relationship and it's an intense moment for that student. And there's a lot of emotion that they go through. And so I'm really looking for students who are going to show up in a certain way. Now, they don't know what they're doing right, and so we're there to guide them. But from the initial email, she was organized and professional. And then I always ask for a Zoom call so that we can see each other and we can see how we interact. What does that look like? Do we have a natural ebb and flow in our conversation? Is this something that we're going to be able to sustain for the next year? Are we going to be able to have the hard conversations? And that was a really great experience because from the moment I saw Debbie, I saw that she was somebody that I wanted to work with. And so it was all of those steps. It was just a really nice connection for both of us. I will say that no matter how many times you do this, I think you always, as a chair, you make assumptions. So, for example, I made an assumption that that initial email was going to be what the rest of her work ethic was going to look like. That's not always true with all students. And so I think that in the beginnings of those relationships, remembering that you're also putting your best foot forward. And so, being prepared in that initial interview where you're both interviewing each other. And I think it's important that the student be thinking, is this going to be the right person for me? And that is valid. And sure, there's the fear of, I need to hurry up and get a chair. Getting the right chair is going to make all the difference for the student.
And a lot of the listeners are in online or hybrid programs where the chair is chosen later on. Often there is time. Take the time. Don't wait till the last minute. Maybe you're not going to find the perfect, just like you're not going to find the perfect spouse. Come on, guys, reality check. You're not going to find your perfect chair, but you want to, again, find someone that you think, yes, this is someone I can work with for the long term, meaning depending on your program, 1 to 5-ish years. If you're in a land-based program, sometimes you're paired with someone right at the start. Sometimes that's who you interview with before you're accepted into the program. However, often there are ways that you can change if the relationship isn't working out. So again, the relationship is an important one. We want to make sure you're taking time to thoughtfully consider what it is you're getting yourself into. You wouldn't just marry the first person who asks you out, right? You take a little bit of time to make sure this seems like this is going to be a good fit. So you guys agreed, yeah, I think we can work together. Deborah, what happened next?
Sure. So I'm glad that Jodie mentioned the video meeting. And so we agreed that as we began the relationship, and I think about the journey and the extent of the relationship is kind of having a beginning, a middle, and an end, but I only mean end of the journey. I truly don't feel like my relationship with Jodie will end. I feel like it will be ongoing, and that's part of kind of how we built this very meaningful relationship. But I would equate the beginning as the beginning, like those first few weeks of, working in the dissertation courses, the middle being around the time that I completed the proposal, first 3 chapters, and gave my preliminary oral defense, and then end preparing for the final oral defense. So that's kind of how I envision it. So at the beginning, we decided that we would meet weekly on video. And I already felt this authentic connection with Jodie because I can see Jodie. We can read each other's expressions. It just feels that it gives all the elements that you could have with someone who lives across the country from you. But one of the things that I will always remember is that in that very first meeting, Jodie said to me, "What do you expect from me as your chair? And how do you envision this going? How do you want it to go?" I felt at that point like she was kind of feeling me out. Like, how much support do you need or want? How much pressure do you need or want? How do you want this to go? And that really helped me to be able to share with her and unpack with her. I'd already been in school for 3 years. I really want to finish this thing. And I want to finish in as quick but realistic timing as I can. And so I feel like that expectation setting from a student perspective was so important because I think that allowed us to get out any potential needs that I had so that she could be the kind of chair that I needed that would help support me in a way that would move me forward. Jodie may have had a different agenda in mind with those questions.
And definitely, right? As I just said, it was from my perspective, it was an interview. And so I'm asking the questions because I want us to succeed. I want to make sure I can be what she needs me to be. And if she's saying I want to be done in a year, and maybe I'm looking at the work that she's already done and I'm thinking, well, there's some gaps and there's going to need to be significant amount of work to do this particular project the way that she has it designed. That's an opportunity for me to have that conversation up front. Or somebody who has a very busy life schedule is responsible for caregiving of another person. If that's their priority, I just want to know. And that doesn't mean that I'm not going to be the chair. It just is an opportunity for us both to kind of lay out in front of us. I love the marriage idea because it's the same type of thing. What do you have going on in the next year? What is coming up for you? Is this going to flow? Or are we going to find ourselves in some pinch points where you've got some important things that are happening next month, and then I've got something important happening the month after that, and we're missing each other. And so it's just really a great opportunity to lay all of that out and be able to see, how are you going to prioritize your time? I think it's really important for students to know writing the dissertation is not the same as passing a class. It is entering a new frontier, and it is an emotional, transformative journey. And they are becoming along the way. And so it's something that it gives them an opportunity to hear from me what those expectations are and those challenges are going to be so that they can be prepared. It's truly the beginning is that opportunity. How are we going to look ahead and be prepared for the shock moments? And there's lots of shock moments throughout a doctoral student's career. I think there's the shock the very first time they take their very first class because they've been so successful. They're in the doctoral program because they've been so successful. They take their first class and they're like, oh my goodness, I didn't know I could read this much. I didn't know I could consume this much information and still be able to make sense of it. Once they begin that dissertation, they think, okay, well, I was successful in my coursework. I've done all of these things. And so you want to make sure you've planned and you're prepared, but also that you have a relationship that is going to be able to handle those shock moments. Deborah, I would invite you to talk about your first shock moment.
That is right when you said shock moment. I'm like, oh, I know what I want to say now. Jodie talks about the transformation, and to transform, you really can't do that without the benefit of feedback. And as much as everyone will try to prepare a doctoral student for, now you're going to get feedback. You're going to get lots of feedback, constructive feedback, and how you handle it is. And, I think we all coming into a program, we've been through a bachelor's program, we've been through a master's program. I did feel somewhat confident as a writer, but I remember at the end of my chapter 1, when all seemed to be going really well, like Jodie and I were chugging along and things sounded good and I was feeling really excited. And then came the moment, and Jodie did prepare me saying that it was the time for my chapter 1 to be sent out to my whole committee for additional feedback, to have that multifaceted feedback. And when I got the feedback back and saw the extent of how much it was, how much new feedback it was, how many new comments there were, and comments that made me think, oh my goodness, I think I might have to start over. I think when I saw things like lack of alignment and muddy points and things like, oh my goodness, it felt like the foundation was maybe crumbling under me. So Jodie was trying to kind of talk me through that feedback. And I remember being on video, suddenly feeling bristly. Like I felt like I had been rubbed the wrong way. I felt uncomfortable. I felt a little bit humiliated by the kinds of comments that were in writing that I felt like, oh, those seemed kind of basic. I should have known that. And then with regard to just talking through, Jodie wanted me to just spontaneously talk through. Just tell me again, what is the problem? What are the questions? What is the alignment? Talk me through it. And I was paralyzed. I said, I don't even know what my problem is. I don't even know. I felt like I suddenly had no idea how to even articulate what it was that I already had worked on for weeks and weeks. And I felt the tears welling up, and I needed to just get off the video. I needed to just get off the call. So we did conclude the call, and I went on a walk to the Happy Dog Student podcast, oddly enough. And I just remember being able to pull away from that feedback. And I remember the point in my walk where I just stopped, hit pause on the podcast, and immediately texted Jodie. And the first thing that I did, because I cared so much about the relationship, I didn't want this uncomfortable moment to somehow move our relationship in a negative direction or something that we might not recover from. Because I thought that was kind of a make or break moment. And I just told her how I was feeling. I was absolutely honest in, I feel embarrassed. I felt unsure of myself. I felt like I couldn't do what you asked me to in that moment. And if I came across in a certain way, I am so sorry. And Jodie, I'll let you talk about how you responded, but this was one of those key lessons in the rearview mirror that I learned about. Be honest. Just be honest if you're struggling. Don't hold it inside. I needed to get that out. And so that's what kind of started our conversation. So Jodie, how did you respond?
So there are lots of shock moments along the way. In this particular moment, the best thing that you can do is hold space while the reaction is occurring. And the most important thing that I wanted for you, Deborah, to know in that moment was what you're experiencing is extremely normal. In fact, to not be having some type of reaction, to me almost would feel like maybe you're not taking the feedback seriously. And you're so invested. And the moment where you think everything's going, and then to get that feeling of, I'm doing this wrong. And everything that I've just worked on may be all wrong. I think that's why that relationship is so important, to hold space for that authentic conversation and to be able to say, first and foremost, I needed you to know you hadn't done anything wrong. And I think that the shock moment comes from we use the word transformative, but I don't think you can understand what that means until you look back. Because when you're in it, everything you've done up until that point in time is to write a paper, revise the paper if you had a chance to redo it, or you build, towards a project in a short class. This is something that it does get muddy as we try to unpack things, right? We start with these tight ideas, tight alignment. And then as we add in the literature and as we add in synthesis, something as simple as word choice, using a different word in a sentence to elaborate on something. When you have fresh eyes looking at that, who hasn't been working with you every step of the way, they're going to see that word and say, "Oh, are you doing something different here? I thought you were doing this other thing." And so because the terminology around alignment and our whole goal, let's keep everything aligned. When that alignment gets questioned, when you've been spending so much time to keep things aligned, it's really scary. But the process has to be muddy. It has to be messy because we have to explore the topic and we have to stay focused, but you don't always quite know what that focus is until you go out and you explore. And so it's very much a learning process. And when you're in it, It's so intentional and so much effort and work that you were doing. And everything that you were doing, the way that you were doing it was correct. And so to get a sense that the output of everything you've done could potentially have broken something. And it's just really challenging. And I think that what I said to you was something to the effect, there's never going to be a problem that we can't fix. And that is something that is different than what you've done in other classes. Everything you've done before is, here's an exam. Are you going to pass the exam? Are you going to pass the class? But this is different. This is support to help you achieve what you're trying to do.
And I remember that clearly, Jodie, that you said, there's always a way. You would always say that. There's always a way forward, and to trust the process. Just, this is how it's supposed to go. This uncomfortable feeling, the feeling of maybe even sometimes taking a step or two backward so that you can again move forward. That happened a couple of times in my program where I had to stop, back up. Let's look at that alignment in the simplest of terms, the simplest of charts. Because once you see it there, then you can go back and restructure your language, and it all made sense.
So to kind of wrap back around this beginning of the relationship where you guys were setting expectations, again, I've got podcasts. Dr. Todd Fiore does an amazing one called The Dissertation Shift. You've been walking through your classes, no problem. Yeah, feedback here, feedback there. Your professors seem nice enough. Things are going well, but then you get to this stage and it is different. So don't make the mistake of thinking, well, I've been fine before. It doesn't really matter who my chair is. I'm getting all A's, and well, everyone's getting A's in graduate school, right? I must be doing okay. To take the time to set the expectations, because it is a different ball game. And it's one of those things, I feel like I'm full of analogies today, but it's like trying to explain to someone what it's like to have a baby. You can read as many books, you can talk to other people, but until you're in it and you are getting that feedback where you're going to have this visceral reaction, which, like Jodie says, is completely normal, how do you work through that in a way that transforms you so that those letters after your name really symbolize the journey that you've been through? And I am also going to link to an episode I have on feedback done by one of our other colleagues that is really great and can help you kind of reframe that feedback so that you can process it. We're not asking you to ignore it. We're not asking you to not have a reaction to it. We're asking that you process it appropriately.
Well, and before I moved to kind of the middle of our journey, which was right around the preliminary oral defense, I would just say that after this happened, and I realized that this discomfort was part of the growth journey, I did look forward to feedback. I always felt like I was a conscientious student. So if there was feedback, I loved being able to address it, hit resolve, show that I had done my part. But there were times that there were things that needed addressing that Jodie was not, okay, to fix it, do this, to fix it, do this. There were sections of my dissertation where she would say things like, this isn't quite landing. This doesn't quite take your reader from point A to point B. Maybe spend a little more time with this. Not exactly what I should do. Just go spend a little more time with it. You'll work it out. You'll figure it out. And those were moments of struggle where I was encouraged to go struggle a little bit. And I think that is a lesson in the rearview mirror that I'd like to impart on students, that it's okay and expected that you're going to be asked to go struggle with things. You're not going to be told in explicit terms to make this right, you just do this. You need to take ownership of the dissertation. And the only way you do that is by being more actively involved in that revision process. So I wanted to say that, and then move into what I would call the middle. Proposal was approved, and it was then time to deliver the preliminary oral defense. And I was anxious about it. I wanted it to go well. And I asked lots of questions to Jodie about what it was going to be like. I had kind of samples to look from, and I knew what the structure was. I knew how to put it together. But I think one of the things I was most anxious about is what happens if I'm asked a question at the end of the preliminary oral defense that I don't know the answer to? What then? Am I just caught? Am I caught as an imposter who doesn't know this stuff? And Jodie was really good about being real and saying, you might not know the answer to every question that's asked, but let's talk about what the intention is behind the questions. It is not to trick you, to trip you up, to say, gotcha, you're not ready. It wasn't anything like that, but instead to help me think through and anticipate the different components of that study that I was about to embark on my own, and make sure that I had strategies or ways of moving through, because there's always a way, right? So what would you do if? So that made me feel better. But what I didn't anticipate, and I'll let Jodie speak to this, what I didn't anticipate is that the afternoon of my preliminary oral defense, my technology all crashed. Like everything that I had carefully cultivated to be ready in my space that I'd rehearsed didn't work. The Zoom didn't work, the audio didn't work, the video didn't work. One by one, the things just weren't working. And I was so rattled, so roused and outwardly rattled that it just made me appreciate now how important flexibility and adaptability is in this journey too. Like there are going to be things that, like the things I was worried most about, that wasn't even my main issue when I actually, did the defense. I think the vulnerability part, and Jodie has this most wonderful quote that she shared with me about vulnerability and just accepting imperfection. Like this didn't have to be a perfect process for me to eventually move forward, but it certainly was an uncomfortable place where I felt imperfect and vulnerable.
I think that because Deborah and I both were educators, I made an assumption of comfort in the discomfort of an oral presentation. And I think this is a moment where a lot of students need to talk about their work at the beginning of their program. They need to have a group of people that they're talking about what they're learning, and they need to be orally discussing what they're doing in their classrooms from the beginning of their first class, because they spend so much time writing and they spend so much time in their head. And so when they get to the point where they've written their first 3 chapters for the proposal and it has been approved on paper, and now we want them to defend it, and that word is really packed. You have to defend it. You have to argue for this work to do the study, is truly being able to get them to showcase this great study and all the work that they've done to talk about why the study deserves to be done and what their ideas are and how they plan to do it. Because they spend so much time in their heads and writing, to talk about it is a little nerve-wracking, which is one of the reasons why I do meet with students by video once a week. I want them talking. I don't want them to get to that oral defense and have another huge shock moment. But what I did inadvertently, because for me as a teacher, I am very much go with the flow. Find myself in an academic setting having to speak to a room full of people without any plans. It just happens. It happens on a regular basis. And so it's something that I think as a chair, you always have to challenge yourself to remember that not everyone feels as comfortable doing these things as you do. They haven't been doing these things as often. And so I did make a mistake of Debbie had sent me her final edits of her oral defense presentation. And I was like, oh, here's some things to think about. That is not something that a student who is prepared wants to hear. And, I'm not even thinking twice about it, but the formality of a preliminary oral defense as a milestone with a rubric that gets graded and you have to pass, I would say is something that chairs need to always be mindful of these moments and the weight of them for their students. And then when her technology failed, I mean, it would be a comedic skit if it hadn't been, real feelings involved.
Yeah.
And in that moment, there was definitely a sense of some of the other people who were participating saying, well, maybe we should do this another day. But with like so many other things, as the student is going through, there's so much to be learned in that struggle. And this is another struggle moment. And it is absolutely okay to say, you know what? This isn't going to work today. Let's reschedule. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if the student wants to do that, it shouldn't be others doing that for them. And so I was like, Debbie, are you good? Here are some options. And she just kept trying them and she kept showing up. And her perfectly set up space that is kind of holy ground for her, she had to pick up and she had to go and move into another space where there were distractions and background noises. And she did it. She did it. And one of the things that I love about that is the resilience that it takes to do a doctoral program and to finish the dissertation. In that moment, there was not a doubt in my mind that you, Deborah, were going to finish your program.
It brought back that whole, I know this dates me, but I think of Dial commercial. It's like, never let them see you sweat. So even though those things made me sweat inside, it wasn't until I was all done and it somehow worked through that I burst out crying at the very end of all that. But, here I am. So we should probably move to the final phase. My preliminary oral defense was approved, and that meant that I was ready to conduct my original study. The collection of data, the writing up of the results in chapter 4, and interpreting what those mean in chapter 5. And so one of the things that was a huge lesson that I learned about this final phase, chapters 4 and 5, is, first of all, a lot of people, they said, oh, Debbie, it's like all downhill from here. This is so easy breezy now. Like the hard part is done. This is the easy part that is next. And what I realized is that didn't go that way for me at all. I didn't feel that way. In fact, in some ways, I felt even more alone than I felt when I moved from traditional coursework to dissertation coursework. Because while Jodie had a very heavy role in guiding me and mentoring me through the chapters 1, 2, 3. Once I got to the collection of data, the approach was much more, well, what do you think should happen? Well, how do you want to approach it? Well, you are the researcher. You are and I thought, no, I don't want to be and just by myself over here. So that learning that I was trusted with this important study, I was trusted as the researcher. I was respected. What I wanted to do, my decisions would be heard and valued. And so there's that new sense of independence in that phase of the journey that was different than the other two phases.
And I want to remind you that before that, you had a hiccup with IRB. And one of the things that we try to prepare students for. So listeners, please listen to this. When it comes to permission to collect data, please have a plan B and a plan C in mind. Be thinking about other ways that you're going to be able to collect your data. You may lose the initial permission that you had, or the permission that you received may not be enough for IRB to approve you to do your study. And so you do all of this work to get to this moment in time, and you want to make sure that you are going to be able to collect your data, that it is feasible. And so one of the things that you had run into, Deborah, was that the population had to change. And I think that the transformation of the journey and how you grew through those first 3 chapters, you were able to pivot within, I believe, 10 days and work with your IRB chair, another support person along the way. Again, not someone who says yay or nay and you get a big X and you're out, but someone who says, this won't work, this is why, and you can work with them to come up with a feasible solution. And so thinking of these people as your support network, I think, is always a really good perspective. But then, because at this point in time, your skills were sharp, you were able to pivot.
Well, and at that voice in my head, there's always a way forward. There's always a way forward. So when I heard from the chair that, oh, everything looks good, but by the way, this segment, this, part of your target population, this is not going to work. So then I just came back with, but what if I did this? How about if I went around and did this? And response was, yeah, I think that would be better. That would be better. And so I remember sharing that with Jodie and with Melanie, my committee member, and they were like, "Yay! Oh my goodness! You found a way forward." So thank you for reminding me of that. But to return to that whole final leg of the journey, I made it through the data collection. I got enough participants. Like some of the fears that you have early on, I had my data, I had all of my words, I had my narrative, and then it was the writing up of the results. This was another example of a time when I had to go backward to go forward. So I didn't know how to write up the results. I finally just stopped where I was and asked Jodie to look and say, am I on the right track? I'd written pages and pages and pages and pages. And she looked at it and told me that I needed to write them up in a way that kind of shows what the major themes are, the categories that have come out of the research. So I didn't do it the way I needed to do it. And so it called upon me to take a few steps back and to kind of restructure, which, yes, it was more work. And was I thrilled in the moment to do more work? No. But did I have a much better appreciation for how it was laid out, how I could then tell the story of it, how I could interpret it, because I had written up the results in a proper manner. So I'm grateful for that. And again, I think it underscores that lesson of sometimes you have to take a few steps back again to be able to move forward in.
Yeah. And I would say you need to struggle with it. And in qualitative research, when you are the research instrument, that is a little bit challenging. You don't know how to do it until you give it a try and then you request the feedback, because conceptually you can read all the manuals and you can think it's going to go one way. But when you're in it, it can feel very overwhelming. There's a lot going on. And when you've asked questions, it feels natural to want to write and organize to those questions. This is how the students answered this question, rather than taking a step back and saying, oh, those questions were helping answer the research question, and taking that bigger step back. And so it's interesting that it truly is, it's definitely an adolescence relationship is what it feels like for me when students go from the final oral defense to data collection and then writing chapters 4 and 5. Chapters 1 through 3 as a chair, I feel very much like you're learning, you're in this together. There's a lot of structure that I can support. But once the student collects the data, they're much more of an adolescent in that they now are coming home at 11 o'clock at night. They're on their own. They're way more independent. And it's the nature of that relationship of the student transforming and becoming their own scholar.
I love that. I love that metaphor because, as children get older, you want to, that gradual release method, you want to give them more responsibility, yet be there. And so I do remember there were many times where I would ask a question And rather than Jodie just giving an answer, well, I would do this, she would come back with a question. Well, what do you think you should do? And she would instead ask probing questions that would help me to arrive at a next step. And then she would, validate that step. So that was wonderful because I think all of those gradual release moments prepare you for that final moment of being able to celebrate your work and be able to speak to your topic and your content area with confidence. And that is, I think, one of the final lessons that I learned when I reached the final oral defense and, joined my committee once again in going through my slides. And, it was really funny because the very first slide, something didn't work, like the audio or something in the very, very first slide. And I just took a moment. I know nothing crashed, but I took a moment, I figured it out, and then it was totally smooth sailing from then on. And at the end of the defense, one of my committee members asked me, what have you learned about yourself? You've learned about, your topic, your content, but what have you learned about yourself? And I just remember saying, I learned that I belong here, that I belong in the scholarly community. And what I felt from Jodie as my chair, as I moved through this transformational journey, is that she regarded me as a fellow scholarly colleague. I felt that. I felt that in the room. I felt that, reaching the end. I feel it now. And that is just such a tremendous thing to feel that, you reach that point and you are with the scholars that you have just looked to and admired through this whole journey. So I think that was cool. And then the second part is that even as we were it was days till the final oral defense, days of the final editing and getting the manuscript ready. And Jodie already started to prepare me for how I might feel at the end of all this. She started talking about, what are you going to do when you're done? Here are some common feelings, these emotional feelings that can occur. Those feelings of letdown, feelings of void. What are you going to do to fill your time when you've been filling it for 4 years now or 3.5 years with dissertation? So start thinking about what projects might you pursue? What travels might you take? What things might you do to be excited, to just kind of help you transition? Because it really, truly is a transition. So I appreciate that too, Jodie, about the final part of the journey, that there was still a lesson to learn, because that was going to be another shock moment is, oh my God, what do I do now?
Well, and we haven't talked about it here, but one of the things that I kept pushing Deborah to do was to share her tripod process that she developed while she herself was going through her program. Once she had actually started her course, her dissertation, I asked her, I said, we have these meetings, but there are these requirements. We need to post all of this in the classroom. And I said, I would just love for you to share a reflection. And I think you had shared maybe one reflection. And then we had our second meeting. And by the second reflection, or maybe the third, all of a sudden it was organized in this beautiful mind, body, heart organization. And the way that you took it upon yourself to take all the lessons from the Happy Doc Student podcast and the advice that you were hearing from people, and you created this framework, and you actually were living and your own kind of study, and you created a framework, and then you lived that framework through the entire process. I don't know how many people create a framework and then turn around and run marathons while they're writing their dissertation. At the end of it, do an ed talk, do a podcast in the same Happy Doc Student podcast that had been there with you as your companion through all of your long walks while you were moving your body as part of your process. So impressive. And so I've been so excited for you to start sharing your journey with others, because I truly believe that you are the premier example of a joyful doctoral student.
And you know what? If any of you that are listening want to hear more about that three-pronged approach, I recorded it in the Happy Doc Student podcast. I think it was episode 128. It was recent and such a joy to actually say it all through. And, Jodie did encourage me from the beginning, like, you need to take all these and put them in a book. You should put them in a book. And I think that got me thinking about who can I help? Who can I help to have truly a journey that encompasses all those things, so that you realize that when you are working on your health, for example, when you are feeding your happiness, your joy, that is working on your dissertation too. And that's a nod to your very early podcast episode, Heather, about just that all counts. All of it counts. So never feel guilty about doing the things that make you feel good physically, emotionally, spiritually, because you need all that to function academically.
I just want to add, your topic for your dissertation highly aligns with these practices. And so you were investigating mentoring for faculty and understanding the role of collegiality and support. And so all of this is relevant for your actual topic. So you were living and breathing your topic and being a joyful doctoral student, all of it throughout. Extremely impressive.
And I will have that link, Deborah, to the podcast where you talked about your three-pronged approach. And really, this episode today has been such a joy to record, because we have really the avatar of a model student and the avatar of a model chair. And both of you are teaching both sides so much through sharing your story and the feelings, the emotions, the roles that you play and how they change over time. Your chair is not just another respected, valued professor. Your chair has a pivotal role in this part of your process. So I'm grateful for both of you for sharing your story and getting it out there so that others can plan ahead. Or if you're in the middle of a relationship, maybe ask yourself, are there ways that it could grow, that it could be better, right? No relationship is a walk in the park every day of the week. We're not promoting that, but we do know that relationships can get better or improve if you put time, effort, and intention into it. And so this is one of those relationships I would like everyone to pay a little more attention to, because it is important. But before we sign off, do either of you have a favorite quote that you want to share, or maybe some final words of wisdom?
I have a favorite quote, and I think it's a nice joint quote from Jodie and myself, because it comes from Jodie. And this is what she told me in preparation for my preliminary oral defense. She said, "Prepare to be vulnerable. This is where deep learning lives." And I write that on everything now. And I share it with my own students, and I appreciate it more than you could ever know.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love that so much. Thank you so much for ending with that and sharing that.
Thanks, Heather, for having us.
Always a joy.
Thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Until then, if you're looking for more ways to invite joy in your journey, check out the free resources at expandyourhappy.com. You'll find downloads like an article I wrote titled The Doctoral Journey, 12 Things You Need to Know That They Probably Won't Tell You. You'll also find a PDF that organizes all podcasts by the 7 steps detailed in the Happy Doc Student Handbook, which you can also find on the website. Finally, if you're looking for a Happy Doc Student swag, I've got that too. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and YouTube channel, and if you want to make my day, rate and review so that together we can change the way doctoral education is delivered and experienced. Hey, one more thing. Just a quick reminder that the information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only.